I study change, and for my whole career, I've been intrigued by how people make changes in their lives. And usually, most of my work, I would say, has been focused on very rational approaches to changing, as if our minds are kind of like clocks. And then over the last 4 years, I've been intrigued with quantum change, with epiphanies, with big changes. Suddenly you go, oh, I have to change my life. Part of this came from my own epiphany experience I had after my daughter Julia passed away. So 4 years ago, she died of a heart attack, a sudden heart attack in the middle of the night. She was one of the first heart transplant recipients. She got a new heart when she was 1. We were on spring break 4 years ago in the Caribbean, and we got her and her boyfriend a suite right on the beach. And she was 19 years old. She was a freshman in nursing school here. And that night she turned to her boyfriend and said, "I'm so happy now that I could die." And she certainly did not, I don't think she expected to die. We certainly didn't expect her to, but that night she died in her sleep quietly of a heart attack. Those were some of the nicest, most important words I've ever heard, that she was so happy that she could die. I mean, who among us can say that? You know, in public health, we're so used to trying to convince people to change their behaviors, to change their lives, that we can change our environments in order to live a longer life. But what does a longer life mean? The promise in medicine is maybe you can live a second century. But what would we do in that second century? Would we just watch more Miley Cyrus twerking videos? Would we watch what the Kardashian sisters are doing in 2060? Often what happens, though, with an epiphany is that something happens to you that's significant. Maybe you do lose a loved one. Maybe you get sick. Maybe you lose a job. Maybe you get a divorce. Something often happens in your life where you become broken open. I started thinking 4 years ago about how to give people a bigger purpose in life. And there's a great model for this. Viktor Frankl lived through 3 concentration camps. He was a physician in a couple of those concentration camps. And he saw over 90% of the people around him die. And he noticed that one of the things that happened very often is that these individuals would lose their purpose, and then they would get sick, and then they would die. So he wrote this amazing book called Man's Search for Meaning. It was a book that told his own personal story, had his own journey that, you know, going through these concentration camps, but at the same time introduced logotherapy, introduced the importance of purpose, and had a little bit of science in it because there was only a little bit of science available. But now there's a lot of science available related to purpose in life and the importance of it. We know that people with a purpose live longer. It's associated with a lower risk of Alzheimer's disease, lower risk of heart attack, lower risk of stroke, lower risk of depression. But it does take a little bit of effort. You have to think pretty carefully about what your core values are. You have to think pretty carefully about your own environment, your family environment, your friend environment, your social environment, physical environment, your work environment, and then ask yourself, what am I here on this earth to do? And as you start considering those factors, you start building an authentic purpose in your life. And so I decided I'd write a book in this area. My book, similar to Viktor Frankl's book in that it is a personal journey. I include my own story with my daughter Julia, but at the same time, I'm trying to help people develop greater purpose in their life. But what would a postmodern version of that be? And I thought, well, maybe it could be written as a graphic novel. I brought in a person who has been an illustrator for DC Comics, for Marvel Comics, for MTV. He's an amazing artist, illustrator. And I worked with him for 3 years as we built this book together, and it's called On Purpose. If we have this defensive shield around us that we might call the ego, how do we get through that shield? One way might be when your ego is broken open if something really bad happens to you in your life. But another way is through transcending your wall, going above your ego and starting to see more clearly. And it turns out that that can be done. You literally can start self-transcending your ego if you start writing about your core values. This process is called self-affirmation, where you're affirming your core values. And this did blow my mind. When I started learning more about simply writing down your core values, why does that make you less defensive to changing your behaviors? It turns out that it does, and with a strength that we find that's equivalent to any other psychosocial factor in any other model of health behavior change than I've ever seen. You know, similar to what Viktor Frankl was doing with logotherapy, we thought, how could we help people develop a stronger, more authentic purpose in their life and help them monitor and live their life in accordance with that purpose? And so we thought, well, the modern way to do that would be with an app. We make it very easy. We turn it into something simple to do every single day. After you put in your purpose in life, and we help prime that by having you identify what your core values are and write a bit about them. And then every single day, we ask whether you lived your life over the last 24 hours in accordance with that purpose in life. So what I'm really interested in is not avoiding death. I'm really interested in life. I'm interested in having a purpose in life, aligning my life with that purpose in life, and having the vitality to live that purposeful life. And that's what this app is about.